What if the real reason you feel like giving up on English isn't grammar, isn't vocabulary, but the quiet distance growing in your own home? Because one ordinary morning in America, I forgot our anniversary, and when my wife looked at me and asked, "What else have you forgotten?" I realized I wasn't just losing a date on the calendar. I was losing words, connection, confidence, and maybe even love. The day I forgot. What if the real reason you feel like giving up on English isn't grammar or vocabulary, but the quiet distance growing inside your own home? That was the question echoing in my mind the morning I forgot our anniversary. It happened in the United States, on a perfectly normal weekday. The sky was pale blue over our small suburban neighborhood. The school bus came at 7:18 a.m. sharp, just like always. My coffee machine made its usual tired sound. Everything felt ordinary. Too ordinary. And that was the problem. You know that strange feeling when life becomes a checklist? Wake up. Work. Pay bills. Practice English. Sleep. Repeat. Somewhere between repeating and surviving, you stop noticing what matters. I forgot our anniversary. Not by 1 hour. Not by accident at midnight. I forgot the entire day. My wife did not yell. That would have been easier. Instead, she looked at me quietly and said, "Do you know what today is?" Now, if you are learning English, this is a dangerous question. It is simple. It is short. And it carries emotional weight. I smiled. I guessed. Is it Monday? Wrong answer. When she told me the date, I felt something drop inside my chest. 10 years of marriage. 10 years since we stood in a small city hall in America, nervous and hopeful. And I forgot. But here is the part no one talks about in real English story practice videos. 4 months before that moment, I had been losing motivation to practice English. I told myself I was tired, busy, overwhelmed by American life. New culture, new policies, new systems, taxes, insurance, school meetings. If you live in the United States as an immigrant, you understand this pressure. Everything requires language. Every form, every phone call, every parent-teacher conference. And when you feel your listening skills are slow, your speaking is awkward, your reading takes too long, your brain gets tired. Psychologists call this cognitive overload. When the brain handles too much information in a second language, it burns more energy than usual. Studies from bilingual research show that operating in a non-native language increases mental effort. You feel exhausted faster. And when your brain is tired, it protects you. It says, "Stop trying. Skip practice today. Watch something easy. Scroll your phone." So I did. I stopped doing slow English listening practice. I stopped reading short English stories out loud. I stopped speaking simple sentences at home. At first, nothing dramatic happened. But something subtle did. When you stop practicing language, you do not only lose vocabulary. You lose emotional expression. I began answering my wife in short phrases. Yes. Okay. Maybe later. Do you hear how cold those sound? Language is connection. When your words shrink, your relationship can shrink too. On the morning of our forgotten anniversary, I realized I had not just forgotten a date. I had forgotten to communicate. She asked me quietly, "What else have you forgotten?" That sentence hit harder than any grammar test. What else had I forgotten? Had I forgotten why we moved to America in the first place? Had I forgotten how we used to sit at the kitchen table practicing English together, laughing at mispronounced words? Had I forgotten that love also requires practice? There is something important about slow English practice that most learners ignore. When you practice slowly, reading out loud, listening carefully, repeating simple sentences, you are not just training pronunciation. You are training attention.
Attention is love in action.
Neuroscience shows that when you focus deeply on someone's words, your brain activates empathy networks. Slow listening increases emotional understanding. That means practicing English slowly can literally improve your relationships. But I had rushed everything.
Fast podcasts. Fast YouTube videos. Fast conversations.
I wanted quick fluency.
Instant confidence. American level speed.
Instead, I created American level distance. That morning, standing in our kitchen, I felt ashamed. Not dramatic movie shame. Quiet shame. The kind that makes you avoid eye contact. If you are watching this because you feel like quitting English, maybe it is not about English at all. Maybe you are tired of feeling behind. Tired of translating in your head. Tired of comparing yourself to native speakers. I understand. I used to listen to American co-workers speak effortlessly and think, I will never sound like that. That thought slowly becomes a belief. And beliefs control behavior. So I stopped trying as hard. But forgetting our anniversary forced me to see something clearly. When you stop practicing communication, life does not pause. Relationships do not wait. Time does not slow down just because your confidence does. In the United States, life moves fast. Calendars are full. Kids grow quickly. Bills arrive on time. The culture values independence and productivity. If you are not careful, love becomes another task on the schedule. And language becomes mechanical. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone at the dining table. I opened an old notebook from our early years in America. Inside were simple English sentences we once practiced. I appreciate you. Thank you for your support. I am proud of us. Basic sentences. Elementary grammar. Powerful meaning. I realized something almost embarrassing. I had been trying to improve advanced vocabulary while forgetting basic emotional English. Fluency is not about sounding impressive. It is about being understood. And that was the day I decided to begin again. Not with complicated grammar, not with pressure, but with slow, clear, honest English. Because sometimes, the day you forget something important is the day you finally remember what truly matters.
When love feels distant.
Have you ever sat next to someone you love and felt miles away from them? Not because you stopped caring. Not because of a big fight. But because life in America moves so fast that your heart cannot keep up with your calendar. After I forgot our anniversary, something invisible settled between us. We were still polite. Still responsible. Still functioning like adults raising children in the United States. But emotionally, there was a quiet distance. And distance is dangerous. Not dramatic, not loud, but slow and silent. If you are learning English in America, especially as an immigrant, you already carry a heavy mental load. Every day feels like a small exam. At work, you listen carefully so you do not miss instructions. At the grocery store, you read labels twice. At school meetings, you nod and hope your understanding is correct. This constant effort creates what psychologists call language fatigue. When you operate in a second language for long hours, your brain consumes more glucose. It literally burns more energy. That is why you feel exhausted after conversations that native speakers handle easily. Now imagine adding marriage, parenting, bills, and cultural adjustment on top of that. You begin to operate in survival mode. Survival mode does not prioritize romance. It prioritizes tasks. I noticed it in small ways. My wife would tell me about her day, and instead of really listening, I would mentally translate, correct grammar in my head, or think about tomorrow's meeting. I was physically present but cognitively elsewhere. In English, there is a phrase, emotionally unavailable. I used to think that meant someone cold or selfish. Now I understand it can also mean someone overwhelmed. When your brain is overloaded, your emotional bandwidth shrinks. In America, productivity is respected. Being busy feels important. Saying I'm slammed almost sounds impressive. But busyness can slowly replace intimacy. At dinner, our conversations became efficient. How was work? Busy. How are the kids? Fine. These are grammatically correct sentences. They are also emotionally empty. Here is something interesting from communication research. Studies show that couples who ask follow-up questions and use detailed responses report higher relationship satisfaction. That means instead of saying fine, saying I felt nervous during my presentation, but it went better than I expected increases connection. Language builds closeness. But when you are tired of practicing English, you default to safe, short answers. I remember one evening when my wife asked, "Are you happy here?" Such a simple question. I hesitated. Because happiness in America is complicated. We moved here for opportunity. Better schools. Stability. A future for our children. But the cost was high. New culture, different values, unfamiliar social rules. In many American workplaces, communication is direct. You must speak up. Promote your ideas. Use confident English. For someone still practicing listening and speaking slowly, this feels intimidating. So I often stayed quiet at work. And silence at work slowly became silence at home. This is the part many English learners do not expect. Your language confidence affects your personality. When you feel unsure about your English speaking skills, you talk less. When you talk less, people assume you have less to say. When people assume that, you begin to believe it. That belief changes how you show up in your marriage. My wife once said, gently, "You used to tell stories. Now you just summarize." That sentence stayed with me. Storytelling is powerful in American culture. Personal stories create connection. That is why Learn English Through Stories works so well. Stories activate memory networks in the brain. Neuroscience shows that narrative structure helps the brain retain vocabulary and emotional meaning at the same time. But I had stopped telling stories. Instead of saying, "Today I felt embarrassed because I mispronounced a word in a meeting," I would say, "Work was okay." Instead of saying, "I miss how easy conversations felt in our home country," I would say, "It's fine." Fine is the most dangerous word in English. Fine hides fear. Fine hides loneliness. Fine hides distance. One night, after the anniversary mistake, my wife sat beside me on the couch. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. She said softly, "I don't need perfect English. I need you." That sentence broke something open inside me. I had been treating English like a performance, like a skill to master for the American system. But she reminded me that English was also the language of our daily love here in the United States. If I stopped practicing listening carefully, I stopped listening to her. If I avoided speaking because I feared mistakes, I avoided emotional vulnerability too. There is a psychological concept called avoidance coping. When something feels uncomfortable, we avoid it to reduce stress. Avoid difficult conversations. Avoid long English sentences. Avoid emotional honesty. But avoidance does not remove the problem. It delays it. And delayed conversations grow heavier. The distance between us was not created in one day. It grew in small skipped practices. Missed opportunities. Short answers. Unasked questions. If you are feeling discouraged about your English learning journey, ask yourself something deeper. Are you also feeling distant from people around you? Are you tired of translating not just words, but emotions? Living in America means adapting constantly. Climate differences. Social expectations. Parenting styles. Even humor feels different. That adaptation takes mental strength. But here is the hopeful truth. The same slow English listening practice that improves your pronunciation can also rebuild connection. When you listen slowly, you become patient. When you speak clearly, you become intentional. When you tell stories, you become human again. Love does not disappear in one dramatic moment. It fades in quiet misunderstandings. And sometimes, the first step to bringing it back is simply choosing to speak again. Cold weather, colder silence. The first winter we experienced in the United States felt romantic. Snow falling softly. White rooftops. Warm lights glowing from living room windows. It looked like a Christmas movie. By our third winter, it felt different. Cold outside. Quiet inside. If you have ever lived in a new country, you know this pattern. The first year feels exciting. Everything is new. Every supermarket aisle feels like discovery. Every American holiday feels interesting. You take pictures of pumpkins in October and fireworks in July. But novelty has an expiration date. After that, reality arrives. In our state, winter was long and gray. The sun disappeared early. At 4:30 p.m., it was already dark. I would drive home from work in silence, heater blowing warm air on my face, radio playing English news too fast for my tired brain. Climate affects mood more than we realize. Research on seasonal affective disorder shows that reduced sunlight can lower serotonin levels, affecting motivation and emotional energy. In simple words, less light, less emotional brightness. Now combine that with second language fatigue and marital tension. Cold weather outside. Colder silence inside. My wife grew up in a warm climate. In our home country, evenings meant neighbors talking outside, street food smells, laughter drifting through open windows. In suburban America, evenings meant closed doors, insulated walls, and polite distance. American neighborhoods are quiet, organized, private. Privacy is respected here. Independence is valued. But sometimes privacy feels like isolation. One night during winter, after the anniversary incident, we sat at the dinner table with our children. Snow tapped lightly against the window. The heater hummed. Our son spoke quickly in English about his school project. He switched between American slang and academic vocabulary effortlessly. I felt proud. And slightly left behind. My daughter corrected my pronunciation of a word gently. "Dad, it's not research, it's research." Everyone laughed kindly. But inside, something tightened. Language shift inside immigrant families is real. Children adapt faster. They absorb accent, humor, rhythm. Parents sometimes feel slower, heavier, careful with every sentence. That dynamic can create subtle power changes. I began speaking less at dinner. Not because I had nothing to say, but because speaking required effort. And effort required energy. And winter had already drained most of it. In American culture, communication is often direct. Feelings are named openly. Problems are discussed clearly. But in our original culture, emotions were sometimes implied, not stated. This cultural difference created misunderstandings.
One evening, my wife said, "You don't talk anymore."
In my mind I thought, I am here every day. I go to work. I pay bills.
I drive the kids to school.
Isn't that talking? But presence without expression feels empty. In English, there is a phrase, silent treatment. Usually it describes intentional silence to punish someone. My silence was not intentional. It was exhaustion mixed with insecurity. But silence, even unintentional, still creates distance. There is fascinating research in relationship psychology showing that couples who experience long periods of low-level disengagement, not fighting, just emotional withdrawal, report lower long-term satisfaction than couples who argue but repair. We were not arguing. We were drifting. Winter amplified everything. Cold air discourages outdoor activity. Short days reduce social interaction. And when you are already adapting to American systems, health insurance policies, tax forms, school regulations, your emotional resilience feels thinner. One Saturday, after a small disagreement about household responsibilities, my wife said something that stopped me. "I feel like I am living with a polite roommate." Polite roommate. That hurt more than anger would have. Because politeness is safe. Roommates are practical. But marriage is not meant to feel transactional. I realized something uncomfortable. I had been protecting myself from linguistic embarrassment by speaking less. But in doing so, I was also protecting myself from emotional vulnerability. When you are learning English as an adult, you fear sounding foolish. You fear searching for words. You fear grammar mistakes in serious conversations. So you simplify everything. But emotions cannot always be simplified. Imagine trying to explain loneliness using only beginner vocabulary. It feels insufficient. So you choose silence instead. That silence slowly becomes habit. Neurologically, habits form through repetition. If you repeatedly avoid difficult conversations in English, your brain learns that avoidance equals safety. It strengthens that pathway. Over time, speaking emotionally complex sentences feels even harder. Winter became symbolic for us. Outside, trees stood bare. Inside, conversations were stripped down to logistics. Did you pay the electric bill? Yes. Pick up milk? Yes. Efficient. Functional. Cold. One night, during a snowstorm, the power flickered. The house went dark for a few seconds before the generator started. In that brief darkness, something shifted inside me. I thought, if the power went out for real, what would I regret not saying? Not advanced vocabulary. Not perfect pronunciation. Simple things. I am grateful for you. I am scared sometimes. I don't want us to drift. Cold weather does not cause marital distance, but it exposes it. America's climate taught me something about emotional climate. If you do not actively create warmth, the environment will not do it for you. The same applies to English learning. If you do not create intentional practice, slow listening, slow speaking, storytelling, the fast American world will swallow your motivation. Winter is not permanent. But silence can become permanent if ignored. That was the season I understood that rebuilding warmth required effort. Not dramatic gestures. Not expensive trips. Just small, consistent, brave sentences spoken slowly. Because sometimes the coldest part of winter is not outside your house. It is inside your unspoken words. The question that hurt. Some questions are short, simple, grammatically easy, and still, they shake your entire identity.
What else have you forgotten?
My wife did not raise her voice when she said it. She did not accuse. She did not cry. She just asked. In American English, tone matters as much as vocabulary. Her tone was calm. But calm can carry weight. That question followed me for days. At work, while answering emails. At the grocery store, comparing cereal prices. While driving past American flags and school playgrounds and tidy suburban lawns. What else have you forgotten? If you are learning English in the United States, you know how easy it is to focus on measurable progress. Vocabulary lists. Pronunciation improvement. Listening speed. TOEFL scores. Job interviews. But emotional memory is harder to measure. Had I forgotten how we survived our first year in America? When everything felt confusing. When we practiced English together at the kitchen table, repeating simple sentences slowly. Back then, our English was limited. But our connection was strong. Now my grammar was better. My listening skills had improved. I could handle workplace meetings without panic. And yet, I had forgotten how to speak from the heart. There is a concept in psychology called inattentional blindness. It means you can miss something obvious because your attention is focused elsewhere. Like the famous experiment where people count basketball passes and fail to notice a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. I had been counting passes, deadlines, bills, responsibilities, grammar corrections in my head. And I missed the emotional gorilla walking through my marriage. When she asked that question, it forced me to pause. In American culture, self-reflection is common. Therapy is normalized. Conversations about mental health are encouraged. But reflection requires vocabulary. It requires the ability to name feelings. If your emotional vocabulary in English is limited, reflection feels incomplete. So that night, I opened my laptop and searched, emotional vocabulary list in English.
It sounds almost funny.
A grown man Googling feelings. But it was powerful. Words like overwhelmed, disconnected, resentful, insecure, grateful, hopeful. Each word felt like a small light turning on inside my brain. Neuroscience shows that labeling emotions reduces their intensity. When you put feelings into words, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, calms down. This is called affect labeling. In simple terms, when you say what you feel less trapped by it. Maybe I had not just forgotten our anniversary. Maybe I had forgotten to label my own experience of living in America. Immigration is not only paperwork. It is identity shift. You go from being fluent and confident in one culture to cautious and observant in another. You become quieter,
more analytical,
more self-protective. At some point, self-protection turns into emotional distance. I started remembering small moments. The first time my wife felt lonely in the United States while I was busy adjusting at work. The time she asked me to attend a school event, and I said I was too tired to handle fast English conversations. The evenings when she tried to start deeper conversations, and I responded with practical solutions instead of empathy. What else have you forgotten? I had forgotten that listening is not just waiting for your turn to speak. I had forgotten that in marriage, presence matters more than productivity. And maybe most painfully, I had forgotten that love requires deliberate attention. In American self-improvement culture, there is a strong focus on goals. Career goals, fitness goals, financial goals. But few people talk about communication goals. What if you set a goal to practice one honest English sentence per day with your partner? Not a perfect sentence.
An honest one.
I felt nervous today. I missed you this afternoon. I am proud of how we handle things. That night, I tried something uncomfortable. Instead of defending myself, instead of explaining how busy I was, I said slowly, I forgot because I have been distracted. But I don't want to forget us. My pronunciation was not dramatic. My tone was quiet. My grammar was simple. But it was real. She did not respond immediately. Silence again. But this silence felt different. It felt like processing, not withdrawal. The question that hurt had created space. Painful questions often reveal blind spots. In English learning, blind spots appear when you think you understand everything but still feel disconnected. In relationships, blind spots appear when daily routines replace emotional check-ins. I began to understand that forgetting the anniversary was not the core problem. It was a symptom of divided attention, of survival mode, of prioritizing efficiency over intimacy. When you live in the United States, the system rewards productivity. But marriage rewards presence. The two are not enemies, but balancing them requires awareness. That question became a turning point. Not because it was dramatic, but because it forced honesty. Sometimes growth does not begin with motivation. It begins with discomfort. And sometimes the most powerful English sentence you will ever practice is a question that makes you look at yourself.
What else have you forgotten?
Losing words, losing connection. There is a quiet moment before you quit something. Not a dramatic announcement. Not a final decision. Just a slow fade. That is how I almost quit practicing English. And I did not realize that at the same time. I was slowly quitting parts of my connection with my wife. After she asked, "What else have you forgotten?" I started paying attention to my daily language habits. What I found was uncomfortable. I was still using English every day. At work. At the store. With the kids' teachers. But I was no longer practicing English intentionally. There is a difference. Using survival English is not the same as growing English. Survival English keeps you functioning. Growing English keeps you expressive. And when you stop growing, something inside feels stuck. Psychologists talk about something called learned helplessness. When people try repeatedly and feel unsuccessful, they begin to believe effort does not matter. So they stop trying. In the beginning, I was excited to improve my English listening and speaking skills in America. I watched slow English story videos. I repeated sentences. I practiced pronunciation in the car. But then I hit a plateau. I could understand basic conversations. I could handle meetings. But I still struggled with humor, fast jokes, subtle emotional tone. Instead of accepting that growth takes time, I became frustrated. Frustration quietly turned into avoidance. I stopped listening to English podcasts on my commute. I chose music instead. I stopped reading short English stories before bed. I scrolled social media in my native language. It felt harmless. But here is what I did not see. Language growth and emotional growth were connected. When you practice speaking, you strengthen neural pathways related to self-expression. Brain imaging studies show that bilingual individuals activate overlapping regions for language and emotional processing. In simple words, practicing language strengthens your ability to communicate feelings. When I stopped practicing expressive English, my emotional vocabulary shrank again. I defaulted to safe words. Okay. Fine. Later. The problem with safe words is that they create safe distance. One evening, my wife tried to talk about her stress adjusting to American life. Healthcare appointments were confusing. School policies were different. She felt isolated. I listened. I nodded. But instead of responding emotionally, I responded logically. You'll figure it out. It's normal. It takes time. All true. All unhelpful. Connection requires more than truth. It requires empathy. If I had practiced my English storytelling, maybe I would have said, I feel overwhelmed too. Sometimes I pretend I understand everything, but I don't. But vulnerability requires words. And words require practice. In the United States, communication culture often emphasizes clarity and emotional honesty. Phrases like I feel are common. Therapy language enters everyday conversation. If you are not comfortable forming those sentences in English, you might avoid them. And avoidance slowly builds walls. One Saturday morning, while cleaning the garage, I found an old notebook from our first year in America. Inside were short English exercises we did together. Today I am grateful for. I feel nervous when. I want to improve. They were simple, beginner-level sentences. But they were alive. Back then, we practiced English not just to survive, but to connect. We laughed at mistakes. We corrected each other gently. We celebrated small improvements. Somewhere along the way, I turned English into pressure instead of play. Pressure kills curiosity. And curiosity is essential for both learning and love. There is fascinating research in educational psychology showing that intrinsic motivation, learning because you are curious, leads to deeper retention than extrinsic motivation, learning because you feel forced. In marriage, the same principle applies. If you connect because you feel obligated, the relationship feels heavy. If you connect because you are curious about your partner's inner world, the relationship feels alive. I realized I had stopped being curious. About English. About her. About myself in this new American identity. Instead, I was managing tasks. One night, after the children were asleep, I tried something different. I told her, slowly, in simple English, I think I stopped practicing because I felt embarrassed. And when I felt embarrassed, I became quiet. And when I became quiet, I felt far from you. It was not poetic. It was not perfect. But it was honest. She looked at me carefully. I don't need perfect English, she said again. I need your real thoughts. That sentence changed everything. Fluency does not build intimacy. Honesty does. You can speak with a strong accent and still be emotionally clear. You can make grammar mistakes and still express deep love. But you cannot connect deeply if you stop speaking your inner experience. In America, it is easy to compare yourself to native speakers. To co-workers who joke effortlessly. To parents who speak confidently at school events. Comparison creates insecurity. Insecurity creates silence. And silence, repeated daily, creates distance. The day I understood that losing words meant losing connection was the day I stopped focusing on sounding impressive and started focusing on sounding sincere. Instead of trying to use advanced vocabulary, I practiced simple emotional sentences. I felt tired today. I was proud of you. I am scared of drifting apart. These are beginner sentences. But they rebuild bridges. Sometimes when you think you are failing at English, you are actually afraid of being seen. And sometimes the real practice is not pronunciation. It is courage. Because losing words is easy. Finding them again, that is where growth begins.
A small English habit.
Big problems rarely need dramatic solutions. They need small, repeated habits. After weeks of tension, distance, and uncomfortable self-reflection, I understood something simple. I did not need a grand romantic gesture to fix our marriage. I needed a small daily English habit. Not for my job. Not for an exam. For us. In the United States, self-improvement culture loves big transformations. 30-day fluency challenge. Speak like a native in 90 days. Fast results. High intensity. Maximum productivity. But intense bursts rarely last. Behavioral psychology shows that sustainable change depends on tiny, repeatable actions. James Clear calls it atomic habits. Neuroscientists explain it as building neural pathways through repetition. The brain strengthens what you practice consistently, even if it is small. So I made a decision. Every night, after dinner, I would tell one short story in English. Just one. Not a long speech.
Not a grammar lesson.
A simple, real story about my day. The first night felt awkward. We were sitting at the kitchen table. The kids were finishing homework. My wife was washing dishes. I cleared my throat and said slowly, "Today something interesting happened at work." Everyone looked at me. I felt nervous. My pronunciation was careful. My sentences were short. I had to present a small idea in a meeting. I was afraid I would forget a word. But I didn't. I spoke slowly. And my manager said it was clear. It was not dramatic. But it was honest. My daughter smiled. "See, Dad? Slow English works." We laughed. That moment felt warmer than any perfect grammar sentence I had ever written. There is powerful research behind storytelling and language learning. When you tell a story, your brain activates multiple regions at once: language centers, memory centers, emotional processing areas. Stories create neural integration. That means storytelling strengthens both communication skills and emotional connection. In simple terms, telling stories makes you more fluent and more human at the same time. The second night, I told a story about my first winter in America. About slipping on ice in a parking lot and pretending I was not embarrassed. The third night, I told a story about missing street food from our home country. Slowly, something shifted. Instead of only discussing logistics, bills, schedules, homework, we began discussing experiences again. In American culture, sharing personal stories is common. At work, people ask, "How was your weekend?" They expect more than fine. They expect a mini story. I had been avoiding those conversations because I feared making mistakes. But practicing at home made it easier outside. This small English habit had unexpected benefits.
First, my listening improved.
Because after I told my story, I asked my wife, "How was your day?" And I listened carefully. Not to correct grammar. Not to prepare my response. Just to understand. Second, my speaking confidence grew. Repetition reduces anxiety. Exposure therapy research shows that gradual exposure to a feared activity decreases fear response over time. The more you speak, the less your brain treats it as danger. Third, our emotional connection deepened. One evening, after I finished my short story, my wife said, "I missed this version of you." That sentence felt like sunlight after winter.
The habit was simple.
But simplicity does not mean weakness. It means focus. Many English learners think improvement requires hours of study. But cognitive science suggests that spaced repetition, short, consistent practice, is more effective than long, irregular sessions. 10 minutes of storytelling per day can outperform one intense session per week. And in marriage, 10 minutes of focused conversation per day can rebuild warmth faster than one expensive anniversary dinner. One night, I asked my son to tell his own story in slow English. He described a science experiment at school. He used new vocabulary confidently. We corrected each other gently. Our kitchen became a mini English listening and speaking classroom. But it did not feel like class. It felt like family. There is something powerful about learning English through real-life stories. It removes artificial pressure. It replaces textbook examples with authentic emotion. Instead of "John goes to the market," we said, "I felt nervous in my meeting today." Instead of memorizing random vocabulary, we practiced words we actually needed: overwhelmed, grateful, proud, disappointed.
These words mattered.
And something else happened. I stopped seeing English as an external challenge. It became the language of our American chapter. We moved to this country for opportunity. For our children. For growth. Why not let English be part of our intimacy instead of a source of stress? The anniversary mistake had exposed our distance. But this small habit began rebuilding our closeness. Not through perfection. Through repetition. Some nights I still felt tired. Some nights my stories were boring. Some nights I mispronounced words. But consistency matters more than brilliance. There is a principle in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together wire together. The more often we pair English speaking with positive emotional experiences, the stronger that association becomes. English stopped being the language of anxiety. It became the language of connection. And maybe that is the most important shift of all. Because sometimes you do not need to change your whole life. You just need one small habit, repeated with intention. Cultural misunderstandings. Living in the United States is not just about learning English. It is about learning invisible rules. No one hands you a manual explaining American small talk, parenting expectations, holiday traditions, or the polite distance between neighbors. You learn by observing, by making mistakes, by feeling slightly confused more often than you admit. And cultural misunderstandings? They do not always explode. Sometimes they just create quiet friction. After we began our small nightly English storytelling habit, I started noticing how many of our past arguments were not about personality, but about culture. In our home country, family life was loud. Emotional reactions were normal. If someone was upset, they showed it immediately. In many American environments, emotional expression can be more controlled, especially in public settings. At first, I misinterpreted that calmness as coldness. When our neighbors waved politely but never invited us inside, I thought, maybe they don't like us. Later, I realized privacy is part of American culture. People respect space. When teachers at our children's school encouraged independent thinking, I felt confused. In our upbringing, respect for authority meant listening quietly. Here, children are encouraged to ask questions. Cultural psychology explains this difference as individualistic versus collectivist norms. The United States ranks high on individualism. Personal choice, independence, self-expression, these are emphasized values. Many other cultures prioritize group harmony and indirect communication. Without understanding this, misunderstandings multiply. One evening, my wife said she felt unsupported when I did not immediately agree with her decision about our daughter's extracurricular activities. In my mind, I was respecting her independence. In her mind, I was emotionally distant. Same behavior. Different interpretation. Language plays a critical role here. If your English listening skills are not strong enough to detect subtle tone, you can miss emotional meaning. In American English, phrases like "that's interesting" can mean curiosity or disagreement, depending on tone. Before, I would focus on vocabulary accuracy. Now I started focusing on emotional cues. Slow listening became a tool not just for pronunciation, but for understanding intention. During one of our nightly conversations, I asked her directly, "When I stay quiet, what does it feel like to you?" She paused. "It feels like you don't care." That sentence surprised me. Because in my cultural mindset, silence meant self-control. In hers, shaped by years of adapting to American communication style, silence meant disengagement. We were speaking English, but we were interpreting through different cultural lenses. Research in intercultural communication shows that misunderstandings often arise not from language errors, but from differing assumptions about what behavior means. These are called attribution errors. We assume negative intent when behavior does not match our expectations. I began asking more clarifying questions. When you say you need support, what does that look like? Do you want advice, or do you want me to just listen? Simple questions. Powerful results. In American relationship culture, explicit communication is often valued. Saying, "I need emotional support right now," is considered healthy. In other cultures, such direct statements might feel uncomfortable. Learning this helped me adjust. And something interesting happened. As I improved my emotional English vocabulary, cultural misunderstandings decreased. Instead of assuming, I asked. Instead of reacting, I clarified. Instead of withdrawing, I explained. Our children became cultural bridges. They corrected our slang gently. They explained school traditions. They laughed at American idioms and helped us understand them. One night, my son explained the phrase, "It's not a big deal." He said, "Sometimes it means it's small. But sometimes it means someone is trying to hide that it actually hurts." That insight from a child felt profound. Language is layered. Culture gives it texture. The more we practiced slow English storytelling at home, the more comfortable we became discussing these differences openly. I told her, "Sometimes I feel pressure to act more confident in America than I actually feel." She said, "Sometimes I feel pressure to pretend I understand everything." We both laughed softly. Cultural adaptation is exhausting because it requires constant adjustment. You evaluate how to dress, how to greet, how to respond to compliments, how much eye contact is appropriate. Without emotional communication, that exhaustion turns inward. With communication, it becomes shared. There is strong evidence in resilience research that couples who frame challenges as us versus the problem, rather than me versus you, experience higher relationship satisfaction. Instead of saying, "You don't understand American culture," we began saying, "We are still learning American culture." That small linguistic shift changes everything. We stopped blaming personality. We started recognizing context. And context is powerful. America did not create our distance. Unspoken assumptions did. The more we slowed down our listening and speaking practice, the more we realized that culture is not a wall. It is a translation process. And translation takes patience. Misunderstandings are not proof of incompatibility. They are invitations to ask better questions. Because sometimes what feels like emotional rejection is simply cultural confusion waiting to be clarified. Science of slow practice. Your brain does not hate English. It hates panic. For the longest time, I thought my slow progress in English listening and speaking meant I was not talented enough. Maybe my memory was weak. Maybe my accent would never improve. Maybe I started too late. But after the anniversary mistake, after the silence, after the small storytelling habit began to rebuild warmth, I became curious about something deeper. What actually happens inside the brain when we practice slowly? Because here is what I noticed. When I rushed English, fast podcasts, rapid conversations, multitasking while listening, I felt stressed. When I slowed down, clear pronunciation, simple sentences, intentional listening, I felt calmer. That feeling was not imagination. Cognitive science explains it clearly. When you learn a second language, your prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for focus and decision-making, works harder. You are constantly decoding grammar, searching for vocabulary, predicting meaning. This creates cognitive load. If the load is too high, your brain activates stress responses. Cortisol rises. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detector, becomes more active. And when the amygdala senses threat, learning decreases. In simple words, stress blocks fluency. This is why slow English practice is powerful. When you listen to clear, Slow speech. Your brain has time to process sounds without panic. Neural pathways strengthen gradually. Repetition builds myelin, the protective layer around neurons that increases signal speed. That is how fluency forms, not through pressure, but through consistent exposure. The same principle applies to emotional communication. If conversations feel rushed, defensive, or overwhelming, your nervous system shifts into protection mode.
You listen less.
You react more.
Slow practice calms the nervous system.
I began testing this intentionally at home. During our nightly storytelling habit, I spoke slower than necessary. I paused between sentences. I allowed silence without filling it immediately. At first, it felt unnatural. American conversations often move quickly. Silence can feel uncomfortable. But something surprising happened. Slowing down made my thoughts clearer. There is a psychological concept called processing time. When you give yourself extra seconds before responding, you access deeper reasoning instead of automatic reactions. Instead of reacting emotionally to a comment, I had time to understand it. One evening my wife said, "Sometimes I still feel hurt about the anniversary." Before, I might have defended myself immediately. It was just one day. I was busy. But because I had trained myself to pause, I said slowly, "I understand why it hurt."
It made you feel forgotten.
That sentence would not have come easily months earlier. Slow language practice had increased my emotional awareness. Research in mindfulness and communication shows that deliberate pauses during conversation increase empathy. When we slow down speech, we increase oxygen intake, regulate heart rate, and reduce impulsive responses. Fluency is not speed. Fluency is flow. And flow requires calm. In American productivity culture, speed is often celebrated. Fast results.
Quick responses. Instant messaging.
But deep learning, whether in language or relationships, rarely thrives under constant urgency. Our children noticed the change too. During dinner, instead of interrupting or finishing each other's sentences, we started letting each person complete their thought. We repeated phrases for clarity. We asked, "Did I understand you correctly?" These are simple communication strategies, but they transform interaction. Language researchers call this active listening. Repeating and paraphrasing increases comprehension and shows validation. Couples who practice active listening report higher satisfaction in long-term studies. Slow English practice had become slow love practice. I also began applying slow listening outside the house. At work, instead of pretending I understood fast conversations, I asked colleagues politely, "Could you repeat that a little slower?" Or, "Let me make sure I understand." Instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt intentional. And something interesting happened. People responded positively. Clarity is respected in American workplaces. Asking for clarification shows responsibility, not weakness. The fear that had silenced me began shrinking. Because slow practice built confidence from the inside. There is a principle in neuroplasticity. The brain changes in response to repeated behavior. If you repeatedly associate English with anxiety, your brain links the language to stress. If you repeatedly associate English with calm storytelling at your kitchen table, your brain links it to safety.
Safety accelerates learning. Safety deepens intimacy.
The anniversary mistake had triggered shame.
Shame triggers avoidance. Avoidance weakens connection.
Slow practice interrupted that cycle. It replaced shame with structure. Each night, 10 minutes. One story. Clear voice. Eye contact. Not dramatic. Not perfect. But powerful. Sometimes we think improvement requires intensity. But the nervous system prefers gentleness. If you feel stuck in your English learning journey, maybe the solution is not more hours. Maybe it is slower minutes. If you feel distant in your relationship, maybe the solution is not a grand apology. Maybe it is a calmer conversation.
Because when you slow down your speech, you speed up understanding.
And when you reduce panic, you increase possibility. Your brain does not hate English. It just needs time to trust it.
Talking to my children.
One of the most humbling experiences of living in the United States is this. Your children become your language teachers. Not officially. Not intentionally. But naturally.
They absorb American English the way dry ground absorbs rain. Fast.
Effortless. With confidence. And if you are not careful, you start feeling like the student in your own home. After we built our small nightly storytelling habit, something beautiful began happening. Our children did not just listen. They participated. One evening my daughter said, "Dad, can we do English story time together?" Together. That word mattered. Instead of feeling embarrassed that she corrected my pronunciation sometimes, I reframed it. I was not competing with my children. I was growing with them. There is strong research in family language development showing that when parents and children practice language together, both improve faster. Shared learning reduces anxiety. It creates positive emotional associations with communication. And emotion strengthens memory. So we turned our dinner table into a mini English listening and speaking classroom, without calling it that. After my short story, I asked my son, "Can you tell me one moment today that made you proud?" He thought for a second. "I helped a classmate with math. He said thank you."
Simple sentence. Clear meaning.
Then I asked, "How did that make you feel?" He paused. Useful. That word hit me deeply. Useful. Sometimes as immigrant parents in America, we feel less useful because of language limitations. We hesitate in school meetings. We reread official emails. We avoid long phone calls. But in that moment, my son reminded me that usefulness is not measured by accent or speed. It is measured by contribution. So I told him slowly, "I feel proud of you. And sometimes I feel proud of myself too, when I speak English even if it is not perfect." My daughter smiled and said, "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be clear." Clear. That became our family word.
Clear English. Clear feelings. Clear intentions.
Living in the United States means navigating many systems, education policies, healthcare forms, workplace communication. But inside the home, we decided clarity mattered more than complexity. We began practicing something simple. Each person shared one high and one low from their day.
High. Something positive.
Low. Something difficult. This structure helped our children develop emotional vocabulary. It helped us too. Research in child psychology shows that children who regularly label emotions develop stronger emotional regulation skills. When families openly discuss feelings, resilience increases. Language is not just academic. It is relational. One night, my daughter's low was that a classmate made a joke about her lunch smelling different.
Cultural difference again.
She looked embarrassed while telling the story. In that moment, I had a choice. I could give practical advice. Ignore them. Or I could connect emotionally.
Because of our slow English practice, I chose connection.
I understand that feeling, I said. When I first worked here, I was afraid my accent sounded different. I felt self-conscious too. She looked at me with surprise.
You feel that?
Yes, I said.
Sometimes I still do.
That was a powerful moment. Instead of being the distant, silent father struggling privately, I became relatable. Vulnerability builds bridges. In American culture, children are often encouraged to express feelings openly. But that openness requires modeling. If parents avoid emotional language, children may struggle too. By practicing English storytelling at home, we were not just improving fluency.
We were modeling emotional honesty.
Our son once asked, "Dad, why did you forget your anniversary?" Children ask direct questions. I took a breath. Because I was distracted and stressed. But forgetting was a mistake. I am learning to pay more attention. He nodded seriously, as if evaluating a life lesson. In that conversation, I realized something profound. English was no longer the language of pressure in our house. It had become the language of growth. Family conversations became smoother. We interrupted less. We listened more. We clarified misunderstandings instead of assuming. Even homework time changed. Instead of correcting grammar impatiently, I asked, "What are you trying to say?" That question focuses on meaning before form. Something language acquisition experts recommend. When meaning comes first, fluency follows naturally. Sometimes I still mispronounced words. Sometimes my children laughed gently. But laughter felt warm, not humiliating.
One evening my son said, "Dad, you talk more now."
He said it casually. But it meant everything. Because for months, maybe years, I had been shrinking. Now I was expanding again. Talking to my children in slow, clear English reminded me why we moved to America in the first place.
Opportunity.
Education. Growth. But growth is not only professional. It is relational. It is emotional. It is linguistic. When immigrant parents stop speaking out of fear, children lose part of their story. When parents speak, even imperfectly, children learn courage. I realized that teaching my children resilience did not require perfect grammar. It required participation. So each night, one story. One high. One low. One honest sentence. English improved. Connection deepened. And the distance that once felt cold and silent slowly filled with voices again. Because sometimes the best way to find your words is to borrow courage from your children.
Rebuilding the anniversary.
There is something humbling about planning a celebration for a date you forgot. It forces you to face your mistake without excuses. Our real anniversary had passed quietly, wrapped in routine and distraction. But as our nightly English storytelling habit strengthened our connection, I knew I did not want that day to remain a symbol of distance. I wanted to rebuild it. Not with grand gestures. Not with expensive gifts. With intention. With language. With presence. In the United States, Celebrations are often highly planned.
Reservations weeks in advance.
Coordinated decorations. Perfect photos for social media. But I realized something important. I did not need a perfect American-style anniversary. I needed an honest one.
So I chose a simple Saturday evening.
I asked the kids if they could spend the night at a friend's house. I cleaned the living room carefully. I set the table with candles we had bought years ago and rarely used. While preparing, I felt nervous. Not about logistics. About words. Because this time, I did not want to rely on short, safe sentences. I wanted to express clearly what I had learned. Earlier that week, I practiced my speech quietly in the car during my commute. Slow English. Clear pronunciation.
No complicated vocabulary.
Just sincerity. Research in communication psychology shows that rehearsing emotionally important conversations reduces anxiety and increases clarity.
Athletes visualize performance. Speakers rehearse presentations.
Why should emotional conversations be different? Practice does not remove authenticity. It strengthens it. That evening, when she walked into the softly lit room, she looked surprised. "You did all this?" she asked. "Yes," I said, smiling. "And I have something I want to say." We sat down. I took a deep breath. "I forgot our anniversary," I began slowly. "But I don't want to forget what we built." I realized I was distracted. I was stressed. I was trying to survive in America instead of live here with you. I paused, letting the words settle. When we first came to the United States, we practiced English together. We laughed at our mistakes. We felt like a team. Somewhere along the way, I became quiet. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I felt insecure and overwhelmed. She listened carefully. In the past, I might have rushed, afraid of silence. But slow practice had trained me to trust pauses. "I am learning something," I continued. "Fluency is not speed.
Love is not perfection. I don't need perfect English. I need honest English.
And I don't need to impress the world. I need to stay connected to you."
My voice trembled slightly.
But I did not stop.
"Thank you for asking me what else I forgot."
That question hurt. But it helped me wake up. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "You remembered now," she said softly. "There is power in acknowledgement." Relationship research consistently shows that taking responsibility without defensiveness increases trust. When one partner validates the other's pain, emotional repair begins. That night, we talked for hours. Not about bills. Not about schedules. About dreams. We asked each other questions we had not asked in years. What do you want the next 5 years in America to look like? What scares you?
What makes you feel alive?
Our English was not dramatic. Our grammar was not advanced. But our connection was real. At one point she said, "I don't need big celebrations.
I need attention."
Attention. That word again. In cognitive science, attention is limited.
What you focus on grows stronger. What you ignore weakens.
I had focused on work, survival, adaptation. Now I was choosing to focus on us. We laughed about our early days in America. The first time we misunderstood a fast-talking cashier. The time we got lost using GPS. The way we used to repeat phrases together like, "Excuse me, could you say that again?" Those memories felt warm. They reminded us that we were brave once. Curious. Playful. We had not lost those qualities. We had just buried them under stress. Before the evening ended, I said one more thing. I want to continue our English storytelling habit. Not just to improve, but to stay connected. She nodded. Me too. That delayed anniversary did not erase the mistake, but it transformed its meaning. Instead of representing neglect, it became a turning point. In American culture, second chances are valued. Reinvention is celebrated. Growth is admired. That spirit exists in relationships too. You can forget. You can drift. But you can also rebuild. Rebuilding requires humility. It requires slow conversations. It requires choosing presence over pride. That night, as we blew out the candles, I felt something shift fully inside me. I had not just rebuilt an anniversary. I had rebuilt attention. And attention, when given consistently, becomes love again. The day I almost gave up, and why I didn't. There was a night I almost deleted everything. The channel. The scripts. The drafts. The voice recordings. All of it. I had just finished editing a long English story practice video, one of those real English story lessons I believe in so deeply. It was built around emotion, around communication, around connection. Not just grammar. Not just vocabulary. Real-life English conversation. And it barely moved. Low views. Low watch time. A couple of comments saying, too slow. One saying, just teach grammar. That night, I stared at the screen thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe this is pointless. If you're learning English right now, I need to tell you something honestly. There will be moments when you feel invisible. Moments when you practice speaking English every day and still feel stuck. Moments when you wonder if your American English pronunciation will ever sound natural. Moments when you think, maybe I'm just not good at languages. That night, I felt exactly that. Not about English. About everything. But here's what stopped me. I replayed a message someone had sent me weeks before. It said, I used your English story listening practice every night before bed. For the first time, I'm not afraid to speak English at work anymore. That was it. Not millions of views. Not viral numbers. One person. One life. One shift. And suddenly, quitting didn't feel dramatic. It felt selfish. Because this isn't just an English learning channel. It's a reminder that growth feels boring before it feels powerful. You see, when we tell ourselves we want to quit English, we're usually not quitting the language. We're quitting the discomfort. We're quitting the embarrassment of speaking English slowly. We're quitting the fear of mispronouncing words. We're quitting the feeling of being behind everyone else. And that's human. But here's the truth most people won't tell you about learning English through stories, about English listening practice, about real conversation training. It works quietly. There's no big explosion of improvement. There's no dramatic moment where suddenly your American accent is perfect. Instead, something subtle happens. One day, you understand a sentence without translating. One day, you respond without planning. One day, You realize you didn't feel anxious speaking English. And that's the breakthrough. Not loud. Not flashy. But real. That night I almost quit. I realized something else. When my wife had asked me, "What else have you forgotten?" months ago, it wasn't about the anniversary. It was about presence. And I had done the same thing to myself. I had forgotten why I started. Not for numbers. Not for algorithm tricks. But because I believe English fluency is emotional fluency. When you learn English through stories, you're not just memorizing phrases. You're practicing courage. You're practicing vulnerability. You're practicing speaking even when your voice shakes. And that's bigger than vocabulary. So instead of deleting everything, I did something small. I recorded another story. Not perfect. Not trendy. Not optimized for quick clicks. Just honest. I talked about failure. About doubt. About wanting to quit. And something interesting happened. The comments changed. People didn't ask for grammar rules. They said, "This feels real." This is exactly how I feel learning English. I thought I was the only one struggling. And that's when it clicked. The reason English story practice works isn't just because of repetition or listening exposure. It works because stories lower your guard. When you're emotionally engaged, your brain relaxes. When your brain relaxes, you absorb more. When you absorb more, you speak more naturally. That's real English conversation training. That's real American English listening practice. And if you're still watching this video, maybe you're at your own almost quit moment. Maybe you're tired of studying English grammar rules. Maybe you're exhausted from watching fast English interviews you barely understand. Maybe you feel behind compared to everyone else. Listen carefully. Progress is not loud. It's layered. Every time you watch an English story video like this, you're training your ear. Every time you shadow a sentence, you retraining your mouth. Every time you understand a feeling in English, you're training your confidence. You don't see the change because it's happening internally. Like building muscle in the dark. The day I almost quit, nothing magical happened. I just chose to continue. And sometimes that's the bravest decision. Not winning. Not being perfect. Just continuing. So if you're thinking about giving up on English learning, I want to ask you something. What if you were 3 videos away from the breakthrough? What if the confidence you're waiting for is already forming? What if the only thing standing between you and fluent English is consistency, not talent? Here's what I've learned. You don't need motivation every day. You need structure. You don't need perfect pronunciation today. You need daily exposure. You don't need to feel ready to speak English confidently. You need to speak anyway. That's how fluency grows. Slowly. Quietly. Powerfully. And I didn't delete the channel. I didn't quit. Because someone out there needed one more story. Maybe that someone is you. So before this video ends, let me say this clearly. If you feel stuck in your English speaking journey, you're not failing. You're rebuilding. If you feel tired of practicing American English listening, you're not weak. You're re-stretching. If you feel like quitting, pause. Rest. But don't erase your progress. Because the most powerful English transformation doesn't happen when you feel inspired. It happens when you feel tired, and keep going anyway. And maybe, just maybe,
this is your moment not to quit. The quiet shift, when English stops feeling like a fight.
There's a moment in every long journey when the struggle doesn't disappear. It just softens. Not because the road gets easier, but because you get stronger. If you've been following this real English story from the beginning, you've seen the tension, the forgotten anniversary, the silence at breakfast, the frustration of not finding the right words. Not just in marriage. In language. In confidence. In identity. And here's something nobody tells you about learning English in America, or learning American English anywhere in the world. Fluency doesn't arrive like fireworks. It arrives like sunrise. Quiet.
Gradual.
Almost unnoticed. After months of English listening practice through stories, after repeating sentences under my breath, after forcing myself to speak English even when I felt awkward, something shifted. One evening, my wife asked me a simple question. Can you explain what you've been working on lately? Normally, I would have hesitated, translated in my head, simplified everything, avoided complex emotions. But this time, I didn't. I spoke. Not perfectly, not fast, but clearly. I explained how I create English story lessons. How I focus on emotional vocabulary. How real English conversation practice is different from textbook grammar drills. How confidence grows through repetition and context. And she didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, she smiled and said, "That makes sense. I can hear how much this matters to you." That sentence did something to me. Because for the first time, I wasn't just speaking English. I was expressing myself in English. There's a massive difference. When you're stuck at the study English grammar stage, you focus on correctness. When you move into learn English through stories, you focus on meaning. Meaning changes everything. Meaning gives language weight. Meaning makes people listen. And here's what I realized in that quiet moment. The anniversary wasn't the real problem months ago. The real problem was disconnection. From her. From myself. From my voice. And learning English, through storytelling, through repetition, through deep listening practice, became the unexpected bridge back. You see, when you practice English listening skills with emotional stories, your brain does more than decode words. It connects patterns.
It stores rhythm.
It absorbs tone. That's why English story practice works so well for American English pronunciation and natural speaking flow. You're not memorizing isolated vocabulary. You're training your ear for real conversation. And one day, without warning, you respond naturally. You don't translate.
You don't panic.
You just answer. That's the quiet shift. A few weeks after that conversation, something even smaller, but even more powerful, happened. We were cooking dinner.
Music playing softly. Nothing dramatic.
She laughed at something I said. Not politely. Genuinely. And I realized, I hadn't overthought the sentence. I hadn't searched for the perfect grammar structure. I had just spoken. That's when English stopped feeling like a fight.
It started feeling like a tool. A bridge. A living thing.
If you're watching this because you want to improve your English speaking skills, I need you to hear this carefully. The goal isn't to sound like a native speaker. The goal is to sound like yourself, clearly. American English pronunciation matters, yes. English listening practice matters, yes. Expanding vocabulary matters, yes. But confidence grows when language becomes natural enough to carry your personality. And personality cannot grow in fear. So let me ask you something real. When you say you want fluent English, what do you actually want? To pass a test? To get a job? To move to the United States? Or do you want to stop feeling small in conversations? Do you want to express your ideas without apologizing? Do you want to connect? Because that's what language is for. Connection. The quiet shift happened for me not when my grammar improved dramatically. It happened when I stopped seeing mistakes as proof of failure, and started seeing them as proof of movement. Every correction meant I was speaking. Every awkward pause meant I was trying. Every imperfect sentence meant I was participating. That's real progress. And here's the beautiful part. When you consistently practice English through stories, especially emotional, relatable ones, you build familiarity. Familiarity reduces fear. Reduced fear increases fluency. In American English conversation, flow matters more than perfection. People respond to clarity and sincerity more than textbook accuracy. And when I realized that, everything relaxed. The tension in my voice softened. The fear of sounding wrong faded. The need to impress disappeared. I just communicated. And something surprising happened inside the marriage too. We started talking more. Not because my vocabulary doubled overnight, but because my confidence did. Confidence changes tone. Tone changes energy. Energy changes relationships. So if you're still in the phase where English feels exhausting, if English listening practice feels repetitive, if speaking English feels scary, good. That means you're stretching. But stay consistent. Because the quiet shift is coming. It might not be tomorrow. It might not be next week. But one day, you'll answer a question without translating. You'll tell a story without freezing. You'll laugh without worrying about pronunciation. And you won't even notice it at first. That's how real change works. Not dramatic. Not viral. Just steady. So don't quit 3 steps before the sunrise. Keep listening. Keep repeating. Keep speaking. Let English become familiar. Let familiarity become confidence. Let confidence become connection. And when that shift finally happens, you'll look back at the version of you who wanted to give up. And you'll feel grateful they didn't. Because fluency isn't a finish line. It's a transformation. Quiet. Powerful. And absolutely possible for you. Before you click away, let me ask you something that might stay with you tonight. What if the life you want, the confidence, the fluent English, the ability to speak clearly in meetings, in relationships, in interviews, is not waiting for you to become perfect? What if it's waiting for you to simply continue? This wasn't just a story about a forgotten anniversary. It was a story about losing connection, losing confidence, almost losing the courage to speak. And maybe in your own way, you felt that too. Maybe you've opened your mouth to speak English, and closed it again. Maybe you've watched American English conversation videos and thought, I'll never sound like that. Maybe you've studied English grammar for years, but still feel invisible when it's time to talk. Listen carefully. Fluent English is not built in dramatic moments. It's built in quiet decisions. The decision to watch one more English story. The decision to repeat one more sentence. The decision to speak, even when your voice shakes. That's how real English conversation skills grow. That's how American English pronunciation improves. That's how confidence is built. Not in perfection. In persistence. And here's what makes this powerful. You are not behind. You are not slow. You are in progress. Every time you listen to English stories like this, you train your ear. Every time you follow along with natural American English dialogue, you train your rhythm. Every time you stay until the end of a video instead of quitting halfway, you train your discipline. That discipline will change your life. But this is only chapter 1. Because in the next story, something unexpected happens. A conversation that almost didn't happen. A sentence that changes everything.
A moment where silence speaks louder than words.
And inside that next story, you'll practice even deeper English listening skills, more natural American English phrases, and real emotional vocabulary you can use immediately in daily life. So if this story felt real, if it felt personal,
if you saw yourself somewhere between the doubt and the breakthrough, don't stop here.
Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next real English story designed to improve your English listening, speaking, and confidence naturally. If this video helped you, comment below.
I am not quitting.
Let that be your commitment, not to me, but to yourself. And if you know someone who feels stuck learning English, share this with them. You never know who needs one more reason to keep going. Remember, you don't need perfect grammar to be powerful.
You don't need a perfect accent to be understood. You don't need permission to speak.
You just need courage and consistency. I'll see you in the next story. And next time, we go even deeper.